The armada approaches. How Trump's nuclear ultimatum to Iran could ignite World War IGHT. Now, as you're reading this, a massive American armada is steaming toward Iran, not a metaphor, not a diplomatic posturing, an actual aircraft carrier, strike group, bristling with fighter jets, cruise missiles, and enough firepower to level entire cities is moving quickly, with great power, enthusiasm, and purpose, toward the Persian Gulf, and the world is holding its breath, because this time there may be no turning back. On Wednesday, Donald Trump issued what can only be described as a modern ultimatum straight out of the pre-World War I playbook. Come to the negotiating table and surrender your nuclear ambitions or face destruction. Hopefully, Iran will quickly come to the table and negotiate a fair and equitable deal. No nuclear weapons, one that is good for all parties, Trump wrote on Truth Social. Time is running out, it is truly of the essence. The subtext was unmistakable, the threat explicit, and in case anyone missed it, Trump added a chilling reminder: should Tehran refuse, the next attack would be far worse than the June bombings that killed 430 people and targeted 3 of Iran's main nuclear facilities. Think about what's being demanded here. The United States, already having bombed Iran in a 12-day war just 8 months ago, is now telling a sovereign nation of 89 million people to dismantle its nuclear program or be annihilated. Not through UN resolutions, not through international pressure, through raw military might. We're not talking about Afghanistan or Iraq. We're talking about Iran, a regional power with sophisticated military capabilities, proxy forces spanning from Lebanon to Yemen, and the ability to close the Strait of Hormuz, through which 21% of the world's petroleum passes. A war with Iran wouldn't be another Middle Eastern intervention. It would be a regional conflagration with global implications. And yet, here we are. Let's be clear about what's actually at stake. Iran's nuclear program, which Western nations insist, is aimed at developing nuclear weapons, despite Tehran's repeated denials. The irony is almost overwhelming. The United States, which possesses approximately 5,400 nuclear warheads, is threatening to bomb a country that, according to international inspectors, doesn't yet have a single one. But here's where it gets complicated. Nobody actually knows where Iran's highly enriched uranium is anymore, since the June attacks when the US joined Israel in bombing 3 of Iran's main nuclear facilities. The whereabouts of the country's weapons-grade uranium have remained unknown. It could have been destroyed. It could have been dispersed. It could be hidden in facilities we don't know about. And that uncertainty is precisely what makes this moment so dangerous. Because when you don't know what your enemy has or where they've hidden it, total destruction becomes the only option. Iran's response to Trump's ultimatum was immediate and unequivocal. No. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi made it crystal clear. Negotiations don't go along with threats. And talks can only take place when there are no longer menaces and excessive demands. He insisted there had been no contact with U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff, no request for negotiations from Tehran, no indication whatsoever that Iran would bend to American pressure. This is the same rhetoric Iran employed during last year's war with Israel: bold, defiant, uncompromising. And as Adnan Hayani, a professor of international relations at Qatar University, pointed out, at the end of the day, they did not deliver. Israel was controlling the skies. The question is whether Tehran has learned from that experience or whether it's doubling down on a strategy that's already failed once. But Trump's threats aren't just about nuclear weapons. They're about something far more visceral: the blood in Iranian streets. Thousands have died in anti-government protests that erupted this month. The US-based human rights activists news agency has confirmed at least 6,221 deaths, including 5,858 protesters. The UN Special Rapporteur suggests the death toll could reach 20,000 or more. Iran's government claims only 3,117 deaths, calling many of the dead terrorists. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the carnage, but the scale is undeniable. Trump has made this personal. He's laid down two red lines for military action: the killing of peaceful demonstrators and the possible mass execution of detainees. Both lines have already been crossed, and that's what makes this different from every other Iran crisis we've witnessed over the past 4 decades. The USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier strike group isn't just symbolic, it's a floating military base capable of projecting American power across thousands of miles. Fighter jets, Tomahawk cruise missiles, electronic warfare capabilities, special operations forces, everything needed to conduct a devastating first strike or respond to Iranian retaliation with overwhelming force. Its deployment to the region is what Hayanieh calls a show of power designed to send an unmistakable message: if you cannot follow exactly what we want, we will let the missiles fly. But here's the critical question: is it a bluff? Throughout his political career, Trump has relied on maximum pressure, campaigns threaten everything, then negotiate from a position of strength. It worked with North Korea, sort of. It worked with China partially. It even worked with Mexico. But Iran isn't North Korea. It's not China. And it's certainly not Mexico. We know Trump is willing to bomb Iran because he's already done it. Last June, as indirect negotiations on the Iranian nuclear program were underway, the United States joined Israel in a 12-day war that bombed 3 of Iran's main nuclear facilities and killed 430 people. Trump has repeatedly claimed those attacks obliterated the Iranian nuclear program. International observers are less certain. The facilities were damaged. Yes. The program was set back. Absolutely. But obliterated. That's propaganda, not assessment. And Iran's response to those June bombings should terrify anyone paying attention. They attacked U.S. forces stationed at the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. American service members came under direct Iranian fire. The incident was downplayed in U.S. media, but the message was received loud and clear in Washington. Tehran is willing to strike American forces directly, not just through proxies. Iranian officials have promised a comprehensive and regret-inducing response. If attacked again, they're not bluffing either. Iran doesn't fight alone. It commands a network of proxy forces that spans the entire Middle East. Hezbollah in Lebanon battle-hardened from years of war in Syria, armed with precision-guided missiles capable of striking anywhere in Israel. The Houthis in Yemen who've already demonstrated their ability to strike Saudi oil facilities and threaten shipping in the Red Sea. Iraqi militias positioned dangerously close to American forces still stationed in Iraq. Syrian government forces to Assad, who owes his survival to Iranian intervention. This isn't a bilateral conflict. It's a regional war waiting to happen, and every one of Iran's neighbors knows it. Both Tehran and the U.S. Air Force have announced military drills near the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which 1/5 of the world's oil passes every single day. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has issued its own ultimatum to the region. Neighboring countries will be considered hostile if their territory is used by the U.S. during any attack. That's a direct threat to Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, every Gulf state that hosts American military bases. And they've gotten the message. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have already signaled they will not allow their airspace to be used for any attack on Iran. Think about that. America's closest Arab allies, countries that have spent billions on U.S. weapon systems, that have aligned themselves with Washington against Tehran for decades, are refusing to participate in a potential U.S. strike. They know what happens next, behind the scenes. A desperate diplomatic scramble is underway. Egypt's foreign minister, Beda Abdelaty, has spoken separately with Iran's Araghchi and U.S. envoy Witkoff, trying to work toward achieving calm, in order to avoid the region slipping into new cycles of instability. Turkey's Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan suggests Iran is ready to negotiate a nuclear file again, though that directly contradicts what Iranian officials are saying publicly. Mediators are working overtime, trying to find an off-ramp before the armada arrives. But as Hayanieh bluntly notes, Trump doesn't really care about regional actors. At the end of the day, he listens to himself. Here's what keeps military strategists awake at night. Nobody knows how this actually plays out. If the US strikes Iranian nuclear facilities which are dispersed, hardened, and some built deep underground, can they actually destroy the program? Or do they just set it back a few years while guaranteeing Iran's determination to build a bomb? If Iran retaliates, they will. Where do they strike? US bases in Qatar, Bahrain, or Kuwait? Oil infrastructure in Saudi Arabia? Israeli cities through Hezbollah? If the Strait of Hormuz is closed, how high do oil prices spike? $150 a barrel, $200. What does that due to a global economy already teetering on recession? If regional militias activate, do we see simultaneous conflicts in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and the Gulf states? And most terrifying of all, what happens if things spiral out of control? Because wars don't go according to plan. They metastasize. Here's a variable nobody's properly accounting for: the Iranian people themselves. Thousands are dead. Tens of thousands more are detained. The protests that erupted this month represent the most serious challenge to the Islamic Republic. Since its founding in 1979, Trump sees this as leverage, a population ready to overthrow their government, if only given American support. But bombing Iran won't liberate the Iranian people. It will unite them against a foreign aggressor, just as it did during the Iran-Iraq War, when millions rallied to defend a government many despised. The protesters want freedom, not American missiles. They want reform, not invasion. And conflating their struggle with US military action is a catastrophic misreading of Iranian nationalism. Here's the cruel irony at the heart of this crisis. The more the United States threatens Iran, the more rational it becomes for Iran to actually build nuclear weapons. Libya gave up its nuclear program. Gaddafi was overthrown and killed in the streets. Iraq didn't have nuclear weapons. Saddam Hussein was hanged. North Korea built nuclear weapons. Kim Jong-un is still in power and meeting with world leaders. From Tehran's perspective, the lesson is obvious. Nuclear weapons aren't a provocation, they're insurance. Every threat Trump makes, every carrier group he deploys, every bombing run he orders reinforces that calculation. We may be threatening Iran to prevent them from getting the bomb while simultaneously guaranteeing they'll do everything possible to acquire one. We've seen this movie before. Just 8 months ago, in June, negotiations were supposedly progressing. Back-channel talks were ongoing. Diplomats were cautiously optimistic. Then the bombs fell. 430 people died. 3 nuclear facilities were struck. And Iran attacked American forces in Qatar in response. Now we're back to threats and ultimatums, armadas and red lines. The pattern is clear. Trump uses the threat of force to extract concessions. But when those concessions aren't forthcoming fast enough, he pulls the trigger. The June attacks were supposed to end this bill, were supposed to obliterate Iran's nuclear program and force Tehran to the table. Instead, we're here again. Same threats, same ultimatums, but with less uranium visible to international observers. And more reasons for Iran to never trust American promises. And this time, there's no more room for escalation short of total war. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Every day, tankers carrying 21 million barrels of oil pass through it. Iran has threatened to close it before. They've never actually done it, because closing the strait would be an act of economic self-destruction, cutting off their own oil exports. But if bombs are already falling, if American missiles are already destroying Iranian infrastructure, if the Islamic Republic is fighting for its survival, then there's no economic cost to high. Mining the strait would be relatively simple. Anti-ship missiles can target tankers from the Iranian coast. Small boats packed with explosives can threaten any vessel trying to pass. Global oil prices would explode overnight. Supply chains would seize, economies worldwide would contract, and every country dependent on Middle Eastern oil, which is most of them, would suddenly have an urgent interest in how this war ends. Here's what almost nobody is discussing. China's position. Iran is a critical partner in China's Belt and Road Initiative. Chinese companies have invested billions in Iranian infrastructure. Tehran is a key node in Beijing's strategy to bypass American-controlled sea lanes. More importantly, China cannot allow the United States to establish a precedent that Washington can simply bomb any country's nuclear facilities whenever it wants, because if that becomes acceptable for Iran, why not North Korea? Why not eventually China itself? Beijing hasn't issued ultimatums or moved carrier groups. But behind closed doors, Chinese diplomats are almost certainly making it clear to Washington there are consequences to this. It's past midnight in Tehran right now. Iranian military commanders are calculating response options. Political leaders are weighing whether defiance or negotiation offers the better path to survival. Intelligence services are trying to determine if Trump is bluffing and concluding that after June, they can't assume he is. In Washington, it's afternoon. Military planners are updating target lists. Diplomats are gaming out scenarios. The president is watching cable news and posting on Truth Social. And somewhere between the Persian Gulf and the Mediterranean, an armada is steaming eastward. The distance is shrinking. The ultimatum stands. And time, as Trump said, is running out. There are only two ways this ends. Path 1. Iran blinks. Despite all their defiant rhetoric, despite their promises of comprehensive and regret-inducing response, Tehran returns to negotiations under the barrel of American guns. They agree to dismantle their nuclear program, submit to inspections, accept limitations on their missile development. Trump declares victory. The armada turns around, and we all pretend this was normal diplomacy. Path 2. Nobody blinks. Iran refuses to negotiate under threat. Trump, having issued an ultimatum, feels compelled to follow through or look weak. The bombs fall, Iran retaliates, regional proxies activate. The strait closes. Oil prices spike, and we find out whether the United States is actually prepared to fight a regional war with no clear end state and no regional allies willing to host the operation. There used to be a third path, the Iran nuclear deal. Negotiated painstakingly over years. Signed by the United States, Iran, and 5 other world powers. Verified by international inspectors. Actually working to constrain Iran's nuclear program. Trump withdrew from it in his first term, calling it the worst deal ever negotiated. Now, having torn up that agreement, having bombed Iranian facilities, having killed hundreds of Iranians, he's demanding they come to the table and negotiate the same constraints they already agreed 2 years ago. The tragic absurdity is that we had a framework for managing this crisis. It wasn't perfect. It didn't solve every problem. But it prevented exactly the scenario we're now facing, and we threw it away. Behind every statistic is a person. Behind every facility destroyed are workers who died in the blast. Behind every protest death toll are families grieving. 430 people died in the June attacks. Iranian officials say 3,117 have died in the protests. Human rights organizations say it's at least 6,221, and possibly over 20,000. If full-scale war erupts, those numbers won't be in the thousands, they'll be in the hundreds of thousands. Iranian civilians, American service members, Arab populations caught in the crossfire. Israeli citizens. If Hezbollah enters the war isn't an abstraction. It's not a video game or a political strategy. It's real people dying real deaths in real time. And we're careening toward it with eyes wide open. Time is running out, Trump wrote. It is truly of the essence. He's right, though perhaps not in the way he intended. Time is running out for diplomacy to find an off-ramp. Time is running out for regional actors to influence American decision-making. Time is running out for Iran to decide whether defiance or survival is the higher priority. And most critically, time is running out for the rest of us to understand what's about to happen and demand our leaders choose a different path. The USS Abraham Lincoln is moving, not as a deterrent. Deterrence requires credibility and restraint, neither of which have been demonstrated. not as a negotiating tactic. Iran has made clear they won't negotiate under military threat. It's moving as a weapon, locked, loaded, and waiting for the order. Behind the scenes, diplomats are scrambling. Regional powers are pleading for de-escalation. Even America's closest allies are refusing to participate. But as Professor Hai Yen noted, Trump doesn't care about regional actors, he listens to himself. And right now, he's demanding Iran surrender or be destroyed. The Iranian response is equally clear. No negotiations under threat. No surrender to ultimatums. Come with diplomacy or come with war, but don't pretend you can have both. These are the immovable objects. These are the irresistible forces. And somewhere in the Persian Gulf, they're about to collide. June gave us a preview: 430 dead. Nuclear facilities destroyed. American forces attacked in Qatar. That was supposed to be the end of it. The decisive strike that forced Iran to capitulate. Instead, it was just the opening act. Now the armada approaches. The ultimatum stands. The threats escalate. And the world watches to see whether Trump is bluffing or whether we're about to witness the opening salvos of a war that could reshape the Middle East and beyond. Time is running out, the president wrote. He has no idea how right he is. The armada sails on. The deadline approaches. And in capitals from Tehran to Washington, from Riyadh to Beijing, leaders are making calculations that could determine whether millions live or die. This isn't about nuclear weapons anymore. It's about pride, power, and the terrible momentum of threats that can't be withdrawn. And, as the distance between the armada and Iran shrinks with each passing hour, the distance between our current reality and all-out war shrinks with it. The countdown has begun. The forces are in motion. And the world is about to discover whether the threat of World War III is a negotiating tactic or a promise about to be kept.